The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. This is Carmen Godwin from FAM. Welcome to our webinar. I want to just go over a few housekeeping items before we get started into the program itself. So let me share my screen. First of all, welcome to the Lunch and Learn. This is building capacity for visitor studies with effective surveys. I want to thank our partners, Visit Florida, and the Florida Department of State Division of Cultural Affairs. They're our sponsors, and we thank them for their support. A few housekeeping items. Again, I'm Carmen Godwin. I'm the FAM Program Manager. Today, the webinar is being recorded, so I just needed to let you know that. If you have questions as we go through the webinar, please just type them into the question or chat box. We will have several question breaks during the program, and we will make sure that your questions get answered. If you would like, if you're on the phone on a phone call instead of logging in on your computer today, there should be an option through the phone to raise your hand, a signal that we can see that you have a question, and we're happy to unmute you so that you have an opportunity to get your questions answered as well. We also have a couple polls during the presentation. Those will pop up on your screen. You'll have about 10 to 15 seconds to answer a question, and then we'll close the poll and share the results with everyone. And they're very simple polls. We hope that you'll participate in those. We also have a handout available. This has some valuable resources in the handout section under your GoToWebinar control panel. There, if you just click on the handout section, there is the FAM webinar handout, and you can download that directly from the GoToWebinar control panel. And then finally, we have a survey that we're going to be sharing with you after the webinar. And I'm going to learn a lot today and share my survey with Martha to make sure that we are getting the most out of our survey that we're sending to you to get feedback on not only this webinar, but future programs that we would like to hold. Now, I just want to do a quick poll. So for those of you who have logged in already, I'm going to open the poll. And the question is, what size is your organization? So if you're a small organization, 0 to 5 employees. If you're a medium organization, 6 to 14 employees. And if you're a large organization, 15 or greater. So if you'll go ahead and click on one of those, and I will close the poll in about 5 seconds. All right, I'm closing the poll now. And then I'm just going to share the results. So it looks like 50% of you are in large institutions, and then the other 50% is divided evenly among small and medium institutions. So that's some information that Martha wanted before we went into her session. Okay, I'm just going to close that out. And next, this is our speaker, Dr. Martha Brown. She's the president of RJAE Consulting. She's got a great deal of experience with surveys, with visitor evaluations, and is involved both locally, statewide, but also nationally in several visitor studies and evaluation organizations, and has done work all over the country. So we're very pleased to have her here with us today to share her expertise. I'm going to be changing this over to Martha Brown so that she can share her screen. So Martha, I've just switched that over to you.
Okay, can you all see my screen? Are we up?
I can see it. Looks great.
All right, great. Thank you, Carmen, and welcome everybody. I'm Martha Brown, and I was hoping to be on live camera for a little bit of this today, but I had some skin cancer surgery this week, and I have a huge bandage on my face. So this is a picture of me, so at least you know who's talking to you today. And I'm glad you're here. I hope you learn a lot. I want to start just with a definition of what visitor studies is, and this is according to the Visitor Studies Association. It is the interdisciplinary study of human experiences within informal learning environments. So all of our museums are entertaining, hopefully fun, engaging, but they're also known as informal learning environments where people are going to go there even if they don't have the intention of learning something, they're apt to learn something while they're there. It's also, I'm sorry, I'm just having trouble moving my box around a little bit. It's also the systematic collection and analysis, and this is really key. It's systematic. This isn't random. This isn't off the cuff. It's a systematic collection and analysis of information or data that informs decisions about exhibits and programs. And so the whole key is not to gather data for the sake of gathering it or for funders or for stakeholders, really to systematically gather some information that informs what decisions you make within your museum. So here are just a few things that museums have studied. These are taken right out of the Visitor Studies Journal. And I do encourage you, if you are not a member of VSA, you would benefit greatly from joining. It's just a great community of folks who are all learning together. So this is a study done in a journal. And these are the two main evaluation or research questions that they were looking for. They really wanted to know how people interacted in different spaces within the museum. And after defining what sustained shared thinking was, they wanted to know what that looked like in different spaces. Here's another one. This one is comparing the different perspectives of staff and family visitors. And this is an important study because a lot of times staff have one perspective and the families have another. So it was looking to see how those were similar and different. So you don't have to do anything this fancy. These were pretty intensive studies. But the whole idea is that there's something that you want to know about how people are experiencing your museum. And so you're going to develop a systematic way of collecting data to get answers to those questions. So those questions are strictly up to you. So just to reinforce it again, we're talking about studying the human experience in your museum with a systematic collection of data, and hopefully that will then give you information to inform next steps or future exhibits or things that you want to do or change. There's different ways of collecting this data when you do a study. And when I say study, I'm talking about small or large, because I understand the varying capacities and sizes of folks that are here with us today. So I'm speaking very, very broadly at this point. I tend to think that a combination of qualitative and quantitative methods give you more data than if you strictly do one or the other. But again, this is all depending on what your main question is. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. But there's different ways of systematically collecting this data. Focus groups is one, like you see on the picture, and this is a small select group of people designed to answer certain questions. Interviews tend to be more one-on-one. Observations are big in visitor studies. Folks tend to get volunteers or researchers to follow people around and measure and observe what exhibits they stop at and how long they spend at each exhibit. Checklists are another tool. Social media mapping is big these days, where evaluators are looking and tracking what people are saying about you and what they're not saying about you on social media. And probably the most popular method that almost everybody uses everywhere are surveys. And that's what we're going to focus on today for the rest of the webinar. So yeah, the question, especially if you're small, you could be asking, who does all this work? Now, the larger organizations are the ones who are more able to have internal evaluators, but these are pretty rare in our field. It's the minority of museums, cultural organizations that actually have the capacity to hire somebody full-time and have them be internal. So most of the time people are using outside evaluators who can come in and work on projects, who are associated with grant-funded programs on defining outcomes and measuring and reporting those outcomes. University researchers, these folks are involved a lot, especially in the studies you'll read in visitor studies journals. This is often done through grants that the university applies for and partners with a museum or cultural organization, and they have the advantage of a lot of underpaid or not paid at all graduate students to help them do the study. And then there is you, the internal staff, whatever your position might be, especially if you're not that internal evaluator. I'm really gearing this talk to staff in general today. So you may be feeling a little bit like this right now, screaming, how am I going to add this or do this? Or, oh my gosh, my boss just asked me to do this and I don't know how. So let's see if we can't build some capacity today. So capacity is the amount that something can produce. So this cow is only able to produce so much milk a day. But farmers are going to want to look at that cow and say, how can I get more milk out of her, right? And that's what capacity building is. It's helping you improve, gain capacity, fine tune, more knowledge, more equipment to do your job at a greater capacity now. And this is something that's really relevant because most of us are always being asked to do more and do more for less in many instances, especially in the nonprofit world. So we're all looking for ways to take what we have, take the staff that we have, and build capacity to be able to do more. So after this webinar, I really encourage all of you to go back to your people, to your entire staff, talk about what you learned today, and ask some honest questions about what capacity you have. Find out, if you don't know already, who has what kind of skills that are needed to do this kind of work, this kind of visitor studies work, whether that be small or large. And throughout this talk today, I'm going to talk about more in detail about what those specific skills are. So by the time this is over, you'll know what to look for. I'm also making a few assumptions going forward that I want to be transparent about. And the first one is that you have a supportive board. You have a board of directors who understand and support visitor studies and know how important it is to the future of your museum. You have a desire to learn, improve, and grow. Those are big assumptions. And the biggest one is perhaps you have the desire to become culturally relevant. And I know from talking to Carmen that this is now an area of focus for the Florida Association of Museums. If you're not doing this work, you need to be doing this work if you plan on surviving. And so I'm going to be using some examples throughout this webinar to help you think about how particularly a survey can help you become a little bit more culturally relevant. I'm also assuming you have some staff. It's going to be really hard for you to do this work if you're a one-person museum, and that those staff have some evaluation skills. And again, by the end of this webinar, you'll have a better idea of what those skills look like. So I just want to pause for a minute. Does anybody have any questions right now before we really dig into the nuts and bolts of how to make a good survey?
Again, if you have questions, you can just type them in the questions or chat box. And or if you want to raise your hand, you can do that too. Any of those methods will make sure to, and by raise your hand, I mean there's like a little hand that looks kind of like it's waving. We can unmute you, or you can just type it into the questions box. And at this time, Martha, I don't see anyone raising their hand or any questions at this time.
Alrighty, I'll keep moving forward. And if something pops into your head as I'm talking, just go ahead and type it into the question box. We'll be taking another question break in just a few minutes and we can get to them then. Before we go on and talk about surveys, we do have another poll for you. Carmen's going to activate this one.
Okay, can you see that okay? So this poll is, do you currently survey your visitors and or members. So just select yes or no. Do you currently survey your visitors or members? And if everyone will answer that, I will give you about 5 more seconds. And I'm going to close the poll now and share the results. So it looks like 80% said yes and 20% said no.
Okay, great. That's good to know. All right, so for the 20% who don't do it, you're going to learn a lot about how to do it well, and for the 80%, hopefully you'll learn how to do it better and things to think about.
And so,
So I want to start.
Martha,
go ahead.
you're going to have to open back up your PowerPoint because the poll looks like it shut it down. So I'm only seeing the survey on your screen now.
All right. Stop showing screen, show screen. Let me see if I can get that.
Oh, that worked. Thank you so much.
Okay, good, good. Thanks for calling it to my attention.
All right.
We're all seeing different things on different screens. So let's start with the pros of using surveys. Surveys are super common. We get surveyed all the time. And here's some reasons why that is. First of all, we're pretty much familiar with surveys. They're not a new and scary thing for many of us. They are relatively quick, depending on the length. It's a way to get a lot of information pretty quickly. You can get information from a larger number of respondents than you can through interviews and focus groups, and they're can be relatively easy to analyze. And I'm really, when I'm saying the pros of the surveys, I'm comparing it to the more qualitative methods like interviews and focus groups. There are some negatives that we need to think about, and that is low response rates. How do you incentivize and how do you get as many people as possible to respond to your survey? It may also be harder to get a random sample because people tend to self-select whether they're going to respond to your survey or not, whether they're going to agree to stop and talk to you, or whether they're going to click that link online. There is something called response bias, and this is just something we all have to deal with in survey analysis. People tend to self-report, and there's this weird psychological phenomenon where even though the survey could be anonymous, people will tend to tell you what they think you want to hear as opposed to an honest response. And that's not always, but it is something that we do want to pay attention for and there's ways to minimize that response bias as well. This is really the focus of my work with you today, is that poorly constructed surveys can invalidate results. If the questions are not right, if you're not asking the right things, that may actually be impossible for you to determine truth, what your survey respondents are really talking about. And the other thing that I think we all suffer from is survey fatigue. I swore I wasn't going to get it because I am a researcher. I kind of committed a couple of years ago. Every time I get asked to take a survey, I'm going to do it just to promote the field. And now I say no all the time because it's obscene how much we are asked to take surveys all the time. So that is something that's working against us right now, is this feeling like, oh God, another survey, I can't do it. So there's lots of things to consider about surveys. First of all, the language that it's in. If you're only doing your survey in English, you're limiting your respondents. So really be clear about that. If you're in Miami, your surveys should definitely be multilingual, Spanish, Creole, perhaps even Portuguese. Think about the area you're in, who you're trying to survey, and how you need to make this available. Keep your literacy level, keep your language and your syntax at about the 4th grade level. Don't assume that everyone you survey has a college education, and even if they have a college education, their reading levels may not be on college level. So the simpler, the better. Length is something to consider. The longer your survey is, the less people are apt to complete it. So short is better, but there are times when you need to do a long survey. So just always keep that in mind. Also consider your own capacity for analysis. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but I'll share a story with you. I had a client who surveyed the young people in her program. And I said, do you have the analysis? And she went to her file cabinet and handed me back a stack of papers that had a Post-it note on the front with tick marks, tallies, not even tally numbers converted to percentages, but her analysis was done on a Post-it note. So this is basically useless. You can't share that with stakeholders. You can't share that with your boss. I mean, she didn't have a capacity for analysis, so tick marks was as good as she could get. So think about that. Think about interpreting the results. I tend to think that this is a group process because even though I'm an evaluator, I don't know if my lens and my interpretation is the right one. So one of the things that I do in my work is I bring people together when we get the results of a survey, we talk about them and we make sense of those together so that we can make sure that the interpretations that we are drawing tend to be a little bit more valid because they do include those multiple perspectives. Carefully design your audiences for taking the survey. You have to think about who you want to take the survey, and this is all based on the purpose of it. Also, think about who's getting the survey report. So all of this is done before you write your first survey question. These are all things to consider. Also, how do you plan to use the results? Don't survey people just for the fun of it, because we all have survey fatigue. Okay, it's no longer fun to take a survey or analyze it. Know how you're going to plan to use the results and what your purpose is. And that takes us straight to 4 big ideas about surveys, and that is your purpose. Why are you doing the survey? So for some of you, particularly if you're small, the survey itself may be the entire evaluation. It may be the entire study, because that's all your capacity is for. You might not have capacity for exploring the results with focus groups or doing other things. But you should have a general evaluation question that drives everything else in your survey. And I'll give you an example of this in just a few minutes. Ask yourself, what exactly do you want to know? All right. It's not a throw spaghetti at the wall type of thing. It's a systematic process for gathering information. So what exactly do you want to know? And this leads into the purpose of your survey. You also need to consider what your respondents wish to tell you. And this gets involved with sensitive questions. Some respondents may not want to disclose sensitive or personal information. So keep that in mind. Keep the people who are taking your survey in mind and be considerate of anything that could be sensitive. There's ways of handling that. If you need to ask sensitive questions, it's okay to do that. You need to prep people and get them ready for that. So all of these things that I'm telling you are not do's and don'ts. They're things to think about. Next big idea is your sample size. Lots of choices here. Who are you going to sample? And again, this relates to your evaluation purpose. Some people are going to be better able to answer the questions than others. So consider your audience and your sample. And size does matter. Now, there's some statistical analyses that can really drill down to tell you exactly how many people should be in your survey. We may or may not have the capacity to do that. But when it comes to surveys, the more respondents you can get is definitely the better. The third big idea is design. What kind of survey will you do? And what this means is, will you do a paper survey? Will you do an internet survey? Will you do a phone survey? Will you do a questionnaire where you stop people, an exit poll, an exit survey, or an entrance survey as they're coming into your facility? So all these kinds of, there's all different ways of surveying people. And then what kinds of questions will be on the survey? And that's what we're going to get into is, are they open-ended? Are they closed-ended? What kinds of questions are you going to ask? We'll get to that in a minute. The fourth big idea is really 3 ideas, and that's analysis, data visualization, and utilization. How are you going to analyze these results? What software? What are your capacity? This is a capacity question for you to go back and talk about. Who will analyze the results? Do you have somebody on staff who can do this work? How will you visualize your results? Okay, you don't just want to hand your stakeholders or fill a report full of raw data. You have to visualize them and put them in a way that in a visual visual way that summarize the data, summarize the findings, and tell the story. And who are your audiences for your survey report? Know who this is going to. So we're going to drill down on a few of these things. What is your plan for using the results? Again, don't do it if you don't plan to use it. So just to summarize again, we've got these 4 big ideas: purpose, sample, design, analysis, data viz, and utilization. Again, all of these things are things to think about that go into the process before you ever start designing and writing that survey, certainly before you administer the survey. So now let's make it a little bit real. Let's focus on our purpose. In this instance, I chose the overarching question. In other words, say this is the purpose of our survey. This is the question we want to know. How welcome do visitors feel in this museum? Okay, this directly links to cultural relevancy. And what you'll want to do is you have to define what welcome means. And you'll need to define this in your survey as well, okay? So don't ever assume that people know or believe or think of welcoming or anything else the way you do. Will you break it down by area? How welcome do they feel at reception or concessions or exhibits, right? These are things to think about. Will you ask about gender and ethnic identity so that you can compare who feels more or less welcome? If you're asking this question, how welcome do visitors feel, you probably will want to do that. And then think about what types of questions you'll ask to get that answer. So let's look at a few of these types that I've mentioned several times now. There's closed-ended questions. The benefit of this is it's a forced response. You're going to give people choices, and they're going to have to pick one of those choices for you. They're also relatively easy to analyze using quantitative methods. You can count the number of people who chose that response, and you can create percentages out of that. And some examples of closed-ended questions are check all that apply, agreement scales, ratings, multiple choice questions, binaries, yes, no, easy, hard. Things like that. All of those are forced response, closed-ended questions. The other type are open-ended questions. And this is the respondent's own words. It requires knowledge of qualitative analysis because they're going to be filling in a comment box. There's going to be a blank space where they can write. And generally, people will not respond or write a lot. But this will be done in their own words. So you're going to get a little bit more of a broader perspective with open-ended questions or closed. So there's benefits of both. And a lot of surveys have both of these type closed-ended and open-ended questions in them. So here's an example. This one is a rating scale. It's good to have at least 5 choices on your rating scales. Some people advocate 7, which are a little bit more nuanced. Whoops. Here's another one. Again, we have five options here. Here's another scale. Now, there's a big argument in the evaluation field about whether you should have that agree or disagree, and or neither agree or disagree. I personally don't like that. I think people really do have an opinion, and I think it gives them an out. So this is just my personal opinion, is I like to force people to tell me something. And if you expand this out into 7 instead of 4 choices, then you can tap more into those nuanced degrees of agreement or disagreement than a 4-point scale does here. But in this instance, I did choose to use an NA, not applicable, because for some people, they may not be able to answer that question because it doesn't apply for them. So this gives them an out, but then it doesn't affect the data. It doesn't invalidate the data there. Here's a little on an example of how to visualize some of these questions. Now, again, some folks may not care about the nuances between strongly agree and agree. Carmen, let me ask you something. Can you guys see my mouse as I'm going over things?
Yes.
Okay. But some people do care about the breakdown between strongly agree and agree, because it all depends on what you want. Like in this instance, we can focus on the very, very few people who disagreed with these statements. But on the other hand, we may want to focus on what can we do to get stronger agreement, to get those, to move those agrees into a stronger sense of agreement. And that's how you use this data to inform decision making and the kinds of things you have conversations about. All right, here's an example of a mixed question. This is a rating scale. And just so you know, I do a lot of surveys on SurveyMonkey. So all of these visualizations that you're looking at, they were taken off of SurveyMonkey type of questions. So this now asks both. How do you rate it? And what can you tell me? This is now, we're getting richer information because we're asking both types of questions on how people felt about the scheduling coordinator. All right, and this one is completely open-ended. It's pretty much saying, talk to me. Did you do this? And if you didn't, why? Just tell me something. And we left a comment box. It is possible to also visualize the open-ended responses. I'm going to show you two different ways to do this. One way is to count the responses and see if you can quantify them. We literally call this quantifying the qualitative data. So these, this was an open-ended question on the survey. What can we do to improve your experience in this program? And we found out that 6 of the kids surveyed wanted to do it more often, and they wanted more activities. 2 wanted to make slime. We have absolutely no idea what that means, but you know, it was data. Here's another way to visualize those open-end responses is to the use of icons. Really helps people remember what these things are. This was about social emotional learning. So we created some, we chose some key quotes or key findings from different observations, different feedbacks, and visualize that as qualitative data. I'm going to pause again, see if there's any questions at this point.
Again, you can just type your questions in the chat box or the question box, or you can raise your hand. So there's a number of ways you can ask questions.
And I know this is a lot, and if your brain's hurting right now, that's okay, because you're going to have access to this recording, and this is so you can go back and revisit and chunk it out, take each chunk at a time.
Right. This recording will be placed on the FAM website in the coming weeks, so you will have access to it as well.
All right, I guess we're ready to move on. Okay, now we're going to get into some nuts and bolts. 7 mistakes to avoid. These are the 7 most common errors people make on surveys. And I'm part of some data visualization and some survey and evaluation groups on social media. And what happens is when we run across bad survey questions, we put them on social media and we kind of joke about them, and you know, with some expletives and some reallys. So here they are. First one are leading questions. How great was your experience today? Don't ever ask your people this, okay? It's perfectly fine for a waiter in Boca to ask this question, because otherwise they're never going to hear anything positive about their work, but it is totally not okay for you to ask this. You want to ask a less leading question. How would you describe your experience in the museum today with a 5 to 7 point scale? And it's up to you to define what that scale is, from terrible to exceptional, however it is you want to define it. But give people a chance for an honest response and not a biased leading question like that. Number 2 is loaded questions. Okay, these are questions that are loaded with assumptions that you have made. How often do you come to the museum? Twice a month. Okay, it's loaded because we're assuming that this person comes to the museum frequently, and what you're really trying to find out is how many times during the year Do you come twice a month? So ask this, break it down. How often do you come to the museum, and give them choices? And then if you want to, if you need to know how many are coming twice a month, you can drill down from there. But those choices could then be also once a year, once a month. They could be rarely, they could be frequently, however you want to define it. Double-barreled questions are quite common, and that's where we ask two things in one question. Did you visit the gift shop today, and did you purchase anything? Okay, so people are going to answer yes or no, and you don't know what they're saying yes to. So you want to break this down. Did you visit the gift shop today? Yes or no? If yes, did you purchase anything? Now you're getting the answer to your question. Jargon is something that you may or may not have to deal with. I do a lot of work in the field of education, and I don't think anybody in the world has more jargon than education. So you want to avoid it, because people outside our respective fields don't necessarily speak our language. So you would never say something like this. Did you spend time in the MDL? You might refer to the MDL constantly in your daily work, but people don't know what that is. You're really asking, did you spend time in the major donors lobby? Double negatives, I don't think people tend to run across about this because they're just so darn confusing. I still don't even know what that means. You want to ask how clean were the restrooms, but again, even this is a loaded question because you're assuming they went to the restrooms. You would first ask, did you visit the restroom, and then ask about its cleanliness. These happen more often than not. Poor answer scale question. And this is where the responses that you offer to people do not match the question you're asking, like this. How easy was it for you to purchase your tickets online? Yes, no. This really happens, folks. This really happens. And it drives people like me up the wall. Okay, the website made it easy for me to purchase tickets, which again is loaded. You would have asked a question, did you use the website to purchase your tickets? And then you'll give them a scaled response. Or you don't ask, did you purchase your tickets online? You give them the NA. Confusing answer scale format. The actual format, how you lay out your questions and responses really matters. You want it to be consistent with the same type of question. So if you're using a scale, agree to disagree, make that consistent between every question. Otherwise, you're putting too much of a cognitive load on people to have different answers to the same types of questions. So this can be really tempting, especially with SurveyMonkey, because they have so many cool choices. You can use stars and you can use different colors and all kinds of things like that. It's pretty and it's fun, but for the brain of the person filling out the survey, you want to be consistent. Keep all your choices on one line. Whatever you stay with, whether it's horizontal or vertical, stay with that. And a lot of the survey software now allows you, I know SurveyMonkey does this, allows you to preview how it appears on a cell phone. Now, if you're using Google Forms, which I don't like at all, I don't know if they have that feature, but that may be something that you have to deal with if that's one of the software programs you're using to do your online surveys. So I'm actually going to add an 8th one to the top 7 mistakes to avoid list, and that is writing errors. Make sure your grammar, spelling, and punctuation are perfect. And I mean perfect. Have somebody else proofread this thing, because it reflects really poorly on you if you send out a survey with these kinds of errors. And you don't, and if people have negative feelings about you based on these kinds of errors, that will absolutely impact how they answer the rest of the questions. So this is super important. You don't want to put your survey respondent in a bad mood when you're asking them to tell you about their experiences. Okay, so I mentioned analysis and interpreting the data were things you needed to consider up front. There are all kinds of programs out there. Excel is something that comes with the Microsoft Office suite, so it's something most of us have access to. There is a free program out there called R. All I know about it is it's free. It involves a little bit more understanding the code, but a lot of people in my field of evaluation are using it all day long. Apparently, it is really good with data visualization. SPSS is a high-end statistical program that you may or may not want to use. Atlas TI is one example of a qualitative analysis software program that you may or may not feel the need to use. I've only ever had to use it with really, really big projects where I have pages and pages and pages of qualitative data to go through. Tableau is the name of another program that I know nothing about, but all of these things are out there for you to explore. As far as interpreting the data, I mentioned this up front, I'm going to say it again. It's really important that you get multiple perspectives on what that data is saying. That you don't have a single lens making that interpretation, because it could be right. It also could not be totally right or valid. So reporting and utilization is that other thing that I'm encouraging you to consider, because not everybody needs a 50-page report. So one of the things you think about is who needs a one-pager? Who in my audience just needs the executive summary? Who needs the whole report? And then how are we going to utilize this report? Okay, you never want to do this stuff, say, well, that was fun, and then stick it on a shelf to gather dust. That is an evaluator's worst nightmare. I really want to encourage you guys to use PowerPoint for your reports. I have completely 100% converted all of my reporting from Microsoft Word to PowerPoint, because it is so much easier to move your graphics and your icons around you. It's just so incredibly flexible. I think it does take a little bit more time, but you don't have that annoying anchor that makes it really hard for you to move your graphics. Incredible freedom where you can place your data viz, you can incorporate photographs, lots of photos, and make a really cool professional looking report without having to hire a graphics designer. And every time you do one in PowerPoint, you get better and more creative at it, and it's fun. So my closing thoughts: think about what you can do, and whatever you do, do it well. That's really important, whether you're under 5 people, whether you've got 50 people on your staff. When it comes to the systematic collection of data and information that is going to inform your decisions, figure out what your capacity is, and then figure out how to do whatever it is you can do to the best of your ability. Always remember, your questions should align with your purpose, and that purpose needs to be crystal clear. Have a fine idea. And I'll just share this with you. I think there is more time and mental energy spent in figuring out what that main evaluation question is than anything else. But once you have that, everything else just flows, because it's all going to align with and center around your purpose. Have a reason for asking every question you ask. Don't go wide. Don't get overly curious. Don't deviate from your purpose. Don't take advantage of the fact that you're doing a study or you got a grant that is funding a survey, so you're going to ask everything under the sun. All right, you have to have a reason for asking every question, because you don't want to offend your survey respondents. You don't want them to feel like now you're starting to cross some lines and dig too much. This is really important, and it has to do with our mindset about doing this. Some people don't evaluate because they're terrified of what they'll get back, terrified of bad feedback. And this is really a fact. People like to just assume that everything is going great and they don't ask. So from a mindset perspective, keep in mind that data are feedback, and feedback is good. Even bad feedback is good, because it tells you what you need to improve. And that's what we're all about. So you're gonna get feedback, good, bad, or ugly. So have a plan in place to analyze it and to use it. All right, if you get great feedback, that's fabulous. You're going to want to share it with the world. It's going to help you with funders. It's going to help you with press. It's going to help you all over the place. If you get negative feedback, that's a chance to circle up with your folks and figure out what you need to do to get better. So there's nothing, to me, there's nothing ever bad about feedback. You're going to get feedback, so expect a change. And just like feedback, change is also good. None of us can stay alive today by staying stagnant. We are in a constant state of change, and change is the one constant in life. So expect a change, and it's good. And finally, know when you need to ask for help. Okay, if you're in over your head, ask for help. If you don't have the capacity, ask for help. I just want to go over with you what's on your handout very quickly, all right? To help you build capacity, I am recommending these. I'm going to walk you through it. VSA is it's just awesome. Join that. Evergreen Data Academy and Depict Data Studio are two of my colleagues, Anne Emery and Stephanie Evergreen. They specialize 100% in teaching people how to visualize data. Costs some money to take their courses, but you learn a lot. Better Evaluation is free and just full of resources. This is a site for everybody. The Quade tool is a really cool thing where you can load in your survey questions, and it will tell you if you have syntax problems. It will tell you if the question's too complicated. It will point out potential errors, and it's totally free. So that's a fun one to use. I am also a resource for you who can help you build capacity, analyze your surveys, help you with analysis, whatever you need. There's some books out. I have read all of these, and I just want to point them out to you. Sheila and Kim's book, Designing Quality Survey Questions, is absolutely fabulous. And if you get this book, you'll find this webinar was based on their work. It's written in normal language. It's not written for academics, even though this definitely could be a textbook and should be a textbook. It's fabulous and pretty easy to get through. It's a great resource to have on your shelf so you can pull it out and refer to it. Stephanie Evergreen's Effective Data Visualization book and sketchbook. If you can't afford to take the courses, she's got books out here that walk you through primarily Excel, how to make good data visualization using Excel. I'm not sure if her second edition also includes R and Tableau or not, because I have her first edition. Kylie Hutchinson's book, Short Primer on Innovation Evaluation Reporting. Again, it's just another super user-friendly book that helps you get out of that standard, boring, lots of texty, Microsoft Wordy, nasty report that nobody wants to read, and really look at the different ways of making those one-pagers and using graphics and different ways of thinking about how you do your report. And the book level best is, it's an old book. It's almost 20 years old now, but this is for people who have little capacity for evaluation or visitor studies and no money to hire an outside consultant and really have got to do this work internally. This is a step-by-step book on how to do this work. I think it has agendas for meetings, it has worksheets. I think it's incredibly helpful. So that's it for me.
Okay.
Feel free to ask me questions at this point.
All right, I'm gonna pull it back over to my screen really quickly, and I just want to ask everybody: do you have questions? I do. While people are thinking about what questions they might have, and hopefully typing them into the box, I have a few questions I wanted to ask you. So we do a survey at FAM after our conference, and I've learned a couple things in listening to your webinar. One is that I think it is one set of eyes on the survey results, and it's mine. So I do think it would be valuable to bring someone else in to look at that and make sure, that it's not just how I'm seeing the data. But one of the most difficult things I find in sort of interpreting data is the open-ended questions. Do you have any specific tips on how, interpreting open-ended questions?
It's hard to answer that, Carmen, without knowing what the open-ended question is. Can you go a little bit deeper about how to interpret them?
Yeah, we might, what we do in our survey is we'll have, like a scaled question about, let's say, food at the conference. I'm just kind of throwing that out. And then people will do the scaled question, and then we'll have a comment box. And so what I normally will do is I'll try and pull, positive and negative comments as examples, but I'm not sure if that's how you're supposed to, use the open-ended piece or the comment piece.
You know, in that type of thing, you could list those comments out and see, you know, did 5 people say we really need vegan options? You know, take a look at that and see, is there a way that you can quantify some of those open-ended responses? I also do consider my one-offs. You know, do I have an outlier in there? Is there somebody who was just miserable the whole time? And do we want to explore that experience, or is this an isolated incident? So there's a lot of questions to ask about those responses you get. I think they're more contextual depending on that question, though.
Yeah, that was going to be my other question: is what do you do with the outliers? You know, on both ends. And so I'm glad you said that you do address those.
I noticed that one of the things that comes up in open-ended questions is, as you read through them, is sometimes you'll get themes. Themes will arise, and at that point, I start categorizing, like, what are the overall kind of umbrella themes that people are talking about. You know, say if it's food, was it variety? Was it quantity? Was it quality? You know, so that then you have an idea of where to pull those comments from.
Gotcha.
And then when it comes to reporting, yeah, I do the same type of thing. Like after I've themed it out, I do tend to take a couple that I feel are representative of that theme to just give as examples, if it makes sense to do that.
Yeah. Okay. And for those of you who are attending today, if you have any questions, put them in the question box or the chat box. I'm just going to leave that open and we can come back to that. But if you type something in, I'll make sure to get it answered. But I did just want to thank you all for coming. I wanted to remind you that we're going to be sending out a survey. I am going to be editing it because I've already put it together, but I'm going to edit it and send it to you, Martha, to look at before I send it out to our group today, so that they can have a good idea of what a good survey looks like. And then I just want to share with you all that we have a couple upcoming programs. We're going to have additional webinars that we schedule, but the next one that we have is February 13th. It's a morning webinar on social media, going into metrics and analytics and engine placement and that sort, search engine placement and that sort of thing. And then in April, we will have a workshop in person on emergency preparedness, and that's going to be in Fort Myers. It's in conjunction with a grants workshop that the Florida Humanities Council is putting on. So it'll be a 2-day in-person program, the first day with the Florida Humanities Council and other grant-making state institutions. And the second day, FAM will host an emergency preparedness workshop. So we hope that you'll keep an eye on that. All of our workshop information is on our Facebook site and also on our website, flamuseums.org. And then on the handout, you also have Martha's contact information, where you can get a hold of her if you have additional questions that either you weren't able to answer today or that you think of later. Something that might not relate specifically to surveys, but other questions that you might have about visitor studies, because as she said in the beginning, there are other ways to gather information besides just surveys. And I thought that was a really good thing to sort of bring up, Martha, that there are other ways and there's other things that you have to consider as part of that process. So I don't see any questions being asked. Martha, did you have any closing comments or thoughts?
Yeah, I really want to encourage everybody to take Kevin's webinar next month, because one of the things I mentioned to you was social media mapping. Now, that's different than looking at your analytics, but you may have a chance to ask him about how you do that, or how that's done, how you can find out what people are saying about you on social media. And the other thing I want to say is, you know, the incentives for doing this in Florida, I think, are lacking, and it's lacking because our work is funded by the tourism board. So right off the bat, it's making the assumption that you exist to provide tourists with a good time and they're going to come and go and their experience doesn't matter. When that's just not the case, because we have 13 or 14 million people who live in Florida who go to these museums all the time too. And these museums are very much an important part of our lives and our families' lives. So I realize that there may not be a lot of incentives to do it. I realize that there may not be the funding to do this. So I really just want to encourage people to think about it, perhaps think about it differently than you did after today's webinar, and to really understand the importance of it. Look at it as a form of feedback, look at it as information and important information, and see what you can do. Because the last thing we need is museums closing their doors because we don't have people walking through them anymore. And a lot of times visitor studies can really inform what you're doing, how you're doing your work, who you're reaching, who you're not reaching, and why, and make some really important decisions going forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Martha, is that, you know, in order to stay relevant, we have to know what people think about what we're doing and who we're not reaching, and how do we, as organizations, make sure that we're serving the larger segments of our society than maybe our founders had, you know, intended. So I think that this is a really good start for our museums in sort of collecting the data first and finding out where they are. So I really appreciate your time today. Again, if you guys have questions and you want to follow up, the handout I will include in my email when I send the survey as well, if you haven't had a chance to download it. But Martha's information is on there. My information is in the webinar as well. And I thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you, Martha.
Thank you all. Thank you, Carmen.
All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.